Hello, everyone. Welcome to our lightning talk session C on assessment. My name is Lisa Regala. I'm going to be helping to moderate our session today. We have three amazing presentations lined up for you. How this will work is that each presenter will have 10 minutes to do their presentation. And then at the end, we hope to have about 10 minutes for Q&A. While the presentations are going on, feel free to put anything that pops up in your head in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat as we go, but during that Q&A time, we'll also open it up and you'll be able to unmute if you would like to ask questions as well. So without further ado, we're going to kick it off with our first presentation, which is entitled Values-Based Assessment, Designing Assessment for Learning in Library Makerspaces. Sam Abramovich and Peter Wardrop unfortunately couldn't be here today, but they were kind enough to do a recorded talk for us. And so we're going to launch that right now.
Hi there. My name's Peter Wardrop. I'm from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I'm going to try to quickly talk about values-based assessment for library makerspaces. And this work is also done with Sam Abramovich from the University at Buffalo and Kai Saplan at University of Wisconsin-Madison here. Let me turn the slide. It's also worth acknowledging some of our other collaborators. Uh, I won't take all the time to explain how great they all are. I encourage you to Google them. But this work cannot be done without great partners in the process. So the takeaways that I want you to get from this, and I hope to squeeze it in by the end of my 10 minutes. Assessment is a value-laden endeavor. Local values of what we think of as being important for our learning experiences can shape what, why, and how assessment happens. And this approach of values-based assessment represents a great opportunity for professional growth for maker educators in libraries as well as other places. So I'm not going to take the time to tell you about how important and how innovative library educators have been with respect to maker-based learning, but I do want to highlight what we already know is maker-based learning experiences in libraries are heterogeneous, variable. They vary by age level of learners. They vary by the amount of time spent on the activity. They vary in the activities themselves, whether they're independent or collaborative, or what the learner is actually supposed to do with the activities. It's variable, to say the least. And that makes assessment in library makerspaces challenging. It's not only this heterogeneity, but it's also the multiple roles of assessment. When I'm talking about assessment, I mean uh, making evidence-based claims about what our learners are able to do, what they know, and are able to accomplish. Not necessarily talking about quantitative counting of indicators or variables, not talking about standardization. And actually, we're talking about the opposite of that. So I do want to just say that this work is in conversation and inspired by some other wonderful and important research. The work that Sam and his colleagues did on their assessment matrix that looked at the alignment between what you're measuring and how you're measuring it in a library makerspace. And Rebecca Teasdale and colleagues work on values and evaluation, but also evaluation criteria in library makerspaces. And this specific, what I'm talking about, values-based assessment, is based on other work that I've done with other colleagues. And values-based assessment is fundamentally engaging with what we as educators, what we as professionals value for learning and engagement in our programs and spaces, and identifying what evidence constitutes engagement in that value. So if we value curiosity, what does it look like for our learners to be curious in our space, and how can we collect information on that? So one example of this is this is from a paper that I can share with you all. Uh, we looked at um, what library educators defined as success. That was sort of our way of entry point in thinking about what they valued. How did they talk about success in their maker programs? And we interviewed 17 library professionals directly working in maker programs or makerspace in two different library systems. And uh, we identified, based on their responses, I mean, we identified a varying array of types of success, but uh, we noticed these properties of success, which is kind of interesting. It's uh, properties of success. It's like who's expected to demonstrate success and what that success looks like. And uh, who gets to, who do you share those instances of success with once you sort of gather that? And these sort of properties of success are important because if we want our library educators to be the designers and implementers of assessment, of deciding what gets assessed and how it gets assessed, coming to terms with these properties of success are important. And to do that, we designed a couple of tools. I'll share one example. After this, I can share the others. But this properties of success analysis tool uh, is really a way of making visible the what success looks like or what it is, but also considering different aspects of that success, such as the time scale of when to look for it, or the kinds of data that can show that success is happening or not happening. But a crucial aspect of this is it's not truly a binary of success is happening or not. It's often, as you probably guess, it's in your own work. It's the extent to which success is being achieved and in what ways and for whom. And so coming to terms with that with this tool and some other tools that we developed are ways that professionals and teams of professionals working in library maker spaces can collectively and systematically start to collect data that's important to what they value. The implications for this work is the what we would argue is the importance of building local assessments, the assessments that are tied to what the educators see as being important. And that is in contrast to a lot of um, motivations for assessment that currently exists in educational spaces where assessment is used to compare, and that comparison relies on standardization that we're assessing the same things in the same ways in Madison, Wisconsin as we are in Buffalo, New York. And what we're saying is that those situations, those settings in a library makerspace probably aren't the same. And even if they're doing the same activity, it gets enacted by different age levels, different arrays of learners, and focusing on what is really important for the local library is a path forward for understanding impact. And I would just also say this is a great opportunity for professional growth. From previous work that I've done in children's museums, this focus on what you value can enable a team of educators to develop a language of learning and a common understanding of what's important uh, for the educational experiences that they provide. And in addition, there's this term that's used in schools a lot about teachers having assessment literacy, and that's this literacy of being able to identify the appropriate evidence to support claims about a particular construct and knowing the ways in which to gather that evidence. It's not easy, and it's especially not easy when what we value for learning engagement are often really powerful but challenging constructs like perseverance or risk taking or curiosity. And so developing our assessment literacy is also sort of this great opportunity from with a focus on values-based assessment. Uh, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or Sam. I guess you could look up Kai as well. I didn't list her email. And since I have you, I just want to mention really fast, here at the University of Wisconsin, we have an annual conference called Play, Make, Learn. I encourage you to look into it because if you're watching this video, your people are at this conference. In addition, we offer a hybrid learning community called Teacher Studio, which gets together once a month uh, to make something. The the link is right there. I encourage you to check it out. And then finally, we offer a certificate program for maker educators, and it's specifically aimed at maker educators that are trying to build a culture of making, a culture of maker-based learning in their organization, in their school, in their library, in their museum, and sometimes not just within their organization, but through their partnerships with other organizations and in their community. And so I would encourage you to check out that website as well. Otherwise, I think that's it. So thanks for watching. I look forward to hearing from you. And I will stop.
All right. So thank you to Peter for that great presentation. I'm going to move us on to our second presentation, which is the observation deck, digital tools for observation, assessment, and analysis. We're joined by Rebecca Miller-John and Amy Holcomb. So I'm going to turn it over to both of them.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. I feel like I'm Rebecca Miller-John, previously of the Bubbler at Madison Public Library, which is where I am presenting this information and context from. But currently I am a Library and Commons Director at UW-Madison. So I'll let Amy introduce herself too.
I'm Amy Holcomb, the Learning Experiences Manager at Skokie Public Library in Illinois. So I oversee all of the events and learning spaces here at the library and worked with Rebecca on developing Observation Deck.
Great. So I feel like Peter's presentation was a great introduction to the observation deck tool because the title says elevating your program assessment, and it could say elevating your values-based program assessment with the observation deck, because that's very much so where this observation tool that we're going to share is coming from, is from that like values-based assumption and trying to get at those really tricky learning outcomes like perseverance and collaboration that Peter, I think, really mentioned in his presentation. So this is the team who has built the observation deck with the wonderful funding and support from the Institute for Museum and Library Sciences, ourselves and Skokie, but also a small rural library in northern Wisconsin, Wapaka, and then Byte Studios, which is our actual developer on the toolkit. So the observation deck came out of years of observational assessment, both at Madison Public Library, also at Skokie, and through the research and partnerships that we've done for a really long time, trying to identify that when we see really amazing things happening in our libraries, or for instance, in the gymnasium at the Juvenile Detention Center, which is where this picture is taken, how do we actually assess what we're seeing? Right. And when we see those glimmers and those amazing visualizations and observations of things like perseverance and like collaboration and like initiatives and agency with youth, how do we assess it? And so we started to realize that like doing documented observational assessment is something that comes naturally to us. Librarians are collectors. They like to collect things. They like to document. They like to journal. But as you think about observation at a large scale, that becomes very complicated and hard to do and hard to keep track of. So we thought that we would, for some reason, embark on the journey of creating a digital tool. And that started with research. So we talked to 70 different people through the scope of our research, both with our initial survey around technology and to our interviews that we did with librarians. And we talked about what data collection, good data collection and observational assessment does. And we came up with some parameters, right, for like what observational assessment would do. And then we talked about why are you actually doing this kind of assessment, right? Like what are your goals with the data and documentations you would collect? And we heard from our institutions that they really wanted a continuous cycle of improvement, right? The ability to plan better programs and communicate with their staffs about like what good programming models look like and what success looks like in their space, in order to recreate it more often. We also found out that they needed a way to share evidence-based outcomes and stories with a variety of different stakeholders, whether that be patrons who are visiting their library programs, library boards who are making decisions about programs, and legislatures about making decisions about budgets. They wanted evidence-based stories that supported these really interesting learning outcomes that were happening in their maker spaces, but also just in their programming spaces. And so this project really took on two different parts. There's the work that you do beforehand, right, to create an observational assessment. And then there's the work that you do while you're assessing and collecting data. And those two parts have to exist together. So even though this whole project was about creating a digital toolkit, without those value-based observational assessment components, that framework that you're observing through, you making those observations is not actually going to be helpful for you. And so we leaned on a bunch of different tools. And this is a tool that we've modified and changed from PLA's project outcome, around actually thinking about developing an observational assessment tool. Thinking about your big goals. What do you actually want to see? What are the indicators or like the specific behaviors, actions, and mindsets that you could observe or identify? And then what evidence you would actually capture, right? So like, what does that actually look like in motion, and how do you prove that you see those things happening? All with the sake of saying that you're going to plan a better program, right? You have intent with your goals, you plan your program accordingly, you facilitate it, you do your observation, and then you reflect on your success. So I'm actually going to go back one slide, and I'm going to show you an example of what a framework might look like. So this is our website, odec.org, for the observation deck, and I'm going to click on the Bubblers Maker framework. And this is an example of what a framework might look like on paper, because the other thing we know is that you don't need a digital tool to do observational assessment. You can do those assessments on paper. So you'll see our big goals that we have for our programs, and then you'll see those indicators of success that we actually use to tag the observations that we make. And then you'll see a place for actually recording observations and notes that you can tag with those various different components and elements. This is where we started, was actually creating our observational frameworks, working with our partners like Skokie, like WPACA, to think about what are the values that they have for their institutions that they use to plan programs, and turning those into paper frameworks that we then could result from there, use in our digital tool, in our digital format. So the observation deck website is right here. And before I jump in and actually show you guys the digital tool, I was hoping that Amy could talk a little bit about what she's done at Skokie and how this has sort of impacted their program.
Thanks, Rebecca. So like Rebecca said, we were part of the project from day one. A lot of the staff that were working in the learning spaces at the time of development were interviewed by Rebecca and her team to influence how we would move forward with building the toolkit. But we also had a starting point. So we at Skokie have 3 distinct learning spaces that are serving distinct audiences that have similar processes and procedures, but they're open every day. And we were already asking staff to fill out what we refer to as an end of shift report using a Google form. But we were finding that like we weren't getting as much meaningful data as we used to when we first opened, because we've been doing this since 2014 in one way or the other. So we worked on developing a framework for observation deck based on the end of shift report. We started off with, it was pretty much the same, where it mirrored the questions we were asking in the forum on the framework. And we found that it was, again, not useful. So we were able to work with our team to really pare down and say, okay, well, what are we actually looking for and what are we hoping to achieve in these spaces? Because we have goals, we have a vision, we have a strategic plan. So how do we incorporate that into this toolkit so that we're looking for that? And so far, it's been working really well. We transitioned fully over to Observation Deck this summer. We have one framework for all three learning spaces. We used to have two. And now we also have a general programming framework that we're using for periodic observations of programs. When my role changed, I now am overseeing all of public programming. And that's really hard to get a sense of what's working and what's not, and being able to connect with program teams on their facilitation strategies and even content. So I set out 2 months a year right now to use this framework or the program framework in public programs, and follow up with individuals to talk about what we can do to improve, or what we can do to make things more successful for not only the facilitator, but the public as well. So this has been a really helpful tool for us to better understand what's happening, and to also make data-informed changes to our processes and our workflows, essentially.
Yeah. Thanks, Amy.
Mm-hmm.
So there actually is the capability for you to test out the observation deck as a digital tool. And it's in the slide deck. You can go to the website, and then the login that you can use that is our sandbox is from our Play, Make, Learn presentation that the conference Peter was talking about earlier. But I'm also just going to show you really quickly what the observer looks like. Within the observer, you have the opportunity to enter relevant information into an observer, like into a piece. This is a digital format that you can access on your phone or tablet. You have the ability to add observations by taking photos, adding notes, and then tagging with elements from your framework that you have created and input into the observation deck. You have the ability to capture the vibe, which we do on these like weird sliding scales, and give yourself feedback, but it's actually very helpful in actually talking about how a program went. And then you have the ability to add a summary, successes and challenges that you saw, as well as see the data that you've tagged at the top. This is great when it's on your phone or tablet. You can use talk to text, which is an amazing tool that allows you to give that feedback to yourself really clearly and really quickly. From there, your data goes into a reporter, which allows you to see all of the results that you have over time. And you can toggle between modes in order to see the observations that you've made. And you can actually sort those modes by indicators and by dimensions to see evidence of different things that you've noticed in your library programs over time. From this, we've actually been able to generate a series of Canva reports where we're able to pull data from the observation deck into those reports to talk meaningfully about the programs that we've observed. And those reports are both, you can see examples of them here, as well as the various Canva templates that you can download and use for free. So we are really excited about, this is an example of a paper framework. So we're really excited to share with you and to encourage you to think about using the resources from the observation deck to think about creating your own value-based templates and value-based pieces to begin your practice of observational assessment on paper, because we are still working on the open source software that allows us to share the observation deck more broadly. So it is an open source piece of software. If you have a tech team, you can download it and use it yourself. But our next steps are actually expanding our service into a supported version of this, where you can go online, create an account, and just pay per user for how many people you actually want to bring onto your team to start doing observations in your own space. So I'm over time. I'm going to stop talking. We're excited to hear your questions, and we can share more about the future of the project in the question section too. Thanks.
Well, this was awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca and Amy. I know there's a lot of excitement about this tool. So hopefully we'll have some time at the end too for some questions, but we're going to move on to our third presentation, Maker Immersion, Developing Curriculum Design and Assessment Skills for Academic Makerspace Course Integration. And I welcome Gretchen Triquet and Katie Music-Piri.
Hello. There we are. And I'm going to go ahead and launch our slideshow. Just one moment. Bear with me. I appreciate it.
While Gretchen's getting that up, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Katie Music Peary. I am an associate university librarian at the University of Texas at Arlington. And prior to being in this role, I was the director of our Fab Lab for about 8 years. So Gretchen and I have partnered extensively when she was here at UTA as well to develop what we've called maker literacies, which is what we're going to talk about today. And Gretchen, do you want to introduce yourself too?
Sure. My name is Gretchen Triquet, and I'm currently the Director of Libraries at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University, but was at UTA for almost 19 years, focused pretty exclusively on learning, student learning. And before I left there was the AUL that was responsible for our learning program and worked closely with the Fab Lab and in that regard.
Awesome. So very similar to what our prior two presentations were talking about. When we first created our Fab Lab 10 years ago, there were a lot of questions both within the libraries and across campus about why are we investing in these technologies? What's the benefit that it can have on our learners, especially in a higher education setting? So that's really the impetus for a lot of the research and the work that we've done over the last couple of years is trying to measure specifically what is gained and learned through making, mostly with curricular making, but we've also tried to intentionally partner with disciplines across the academy. So our makerspaces are open to all of our disciplines. They're not exclusive to engineering or the arts, and really kind of discovering and digging into what the librarian's role in that process should look like and how we can better prepare librarians for that work in the future. So this started with an IMLS grant as well, not the project grant, the planning grant where we kind of developed an initial list of the same transferable values, career ready skills that we believed students were gaining through the act of making in our spaces. And then piloted that with other universities across the country to kind of refine that list. And in addition to refining the list of competencies, we were also assessing both the faculty and the librarians on what they felt like. Was it a beneficial partnership? Did they feel like they had the skills that they needed to do this job well? And ultimately what we found is that many of the librarians felt ill-equipped to partner with faculty in the curriculum development process. So our second grant was focused on refining those competencies, but also on creating some education and outreach to library and makerspace staff to help better equip them to say, okay, here's what your unique expertise is within this arena. You're not the subject matter expert that the faculty member is, but you do have teaching experience, curricular development experience, and you have experience using some of these tools. So it really needs to be a partnership between all two or three parties. Sometimes the librarians have the expertise with the tools. Sometimes the librarian is also partnering with the makerspace staff so that there's domain expertise within all three areas to create an assignment that truly gets to the heart of the subject learning outcomes that the faculty member is trying to achieve. So ultimately, through the course of all of that work, we have whittled things down to this list of 10 competencies. And as you can see, there's some great overlap with what our previous presenters were talking about, where it's not just the skills that you need to know to operate XYZ machine. These are transferable skills that extend far beyond the makerspace or how to use a 3D printer. We're talking about things like engaging in effective teamwork, knowledge management, how to assess whether you even need to make in the first place or whether you should buy a solution. What's the cost benefit of engaging in that type of work? So in addition to creating this list of 10 competencies, we've also created a set of rubrics so that when we're partnering with faculty, we can kind of delve deeper into what they can actually be looking for and observing and assessing when in the act of making. So Gretchen, do you want to talk a little bit more about the domains?
Yes, sure. I want to just add really quickly as well that these competencies, the rubrics, the creation of a framework is the byproduct of, I think, about 6 or 7 different iterations with feedback from both faculty and librarians, letting us know when the language didn't make sense or they saw too much overlap between some of the content. And so I think what was at one point maybe 17 or 18 competencies was condensed down into 10. And then to facilitate the use of the materials even more in the development of lesson plans, we created a framework so that they could more easily figure out what they wanted to lean into when working with students. So the 10 competencies were divided into 4 different frameworks: inquiry, foundational practice, managed practice, and transferred knowledge. There is overlap between the competencies that exist within those, and the expression of which is going to depend on sort of the artifact of student learning and the alignment with a subject-based learning outcome. From there, again, with multiple iterations, we developed rubrics for each competency. Within each competency, there are sub-competencies, and then an articulation in the rubrics of what someone would expect to see if a student were either engaging us in either an expert, proficient, developing, or emerging way. Additionally, there is adaptable language in all of these tools so that when you define that context, it can be better articulated in the terms of the subject area in which the teaching was happening. This was very much a byproduct of the conversations that we often had with students, where they were trying to understand why making was a part of the work that they were being asked to do in a course that would not necessarily had a maker component to it. Whereas our engineers and our art students had a high level of comfort with making as part of their subject-based learning. This was more atypical in humanities-based courses and some of the social sciences. And so we wanted to make sure that everything that was produced, that it could be adapted so that faculty could demonstrate how the subject-based learning was closely tied to what the students were being asked to do and what it might look like if they were doing it well. Additionally, with our roles changing, me leaving UTA and Katie moving into a different role, there's still work that should be done in this area, I think, to further develop this. I think we have developed these tools. We've done a one-day immersion as part of that, but I think that there is opportunity for the creation of local and regional professional development activities around these skills. I've found coming to a new institution, I've had to start from scratch. So having the same conversations with our librarians about experiential education, about pedagogical development and lesson planning, and I think having a network of folks having the same conversations in a regional setting would be incredibly beneficial. We are still trying to continue to add and grow a repository for open curricula so that there is opportunity for reuse and remix. And rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, when many of our faculty are hoping to have some of the same learning achieved by their students. And then finally, and I think much of this was addressed today, so it was kind of hard for me to transition into presenter mode from learner mode as I was listening to the prior 2 presentations. I think there is a lot of work to be done around articulating student growth in the affective domain and talking about the dispositions of a maker, things like resilience, curiosity, confidence, and how do we make that part of the academic endeavor. I think it's something that is more commonly discussed within the context of public and just open use of makerspaces rather than looking at that as a sort of a measurable skill that we would like to determine within a curricular and academic setting. In order to access the rubrics and the competencies, as well as the current repository, the website is listed here, but if you just go to UTA, if you Google UTA Maker Literacies, you'll easily be able to navigate to that. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Katie and Gretchen. This was another amazing tool. We have a few minutes, about 5 minutes for questions. If you have them, feel free to unmute and ask your question. You can also put it in the chat. I just saw a lot of enthusiasm so far for these tools, but feel free to post any questions. I'll ask one while we're waiting too. And I'm just curious in either of these cases, if either of you have an example of how, you know, the data from the observation deck or this maker competency tool was really applied, like just a short specific example of how someone like used the data from that to change something or to make a switch in their space.
Yeah, I can go ahead and share it, Lisa. I shared an example of a report that we put forward. And I can share my screen or I can drop it in the chat. Give me just 1 second. So we did a series of observations about our Bubbler Artist in Residence program, which was an opportunity for us to share I'm sorry, I'm not saying this very well, which was an opportunity for us to observe our artists in residence that were happening across all of our libraries over the course of a single summer. And I just shared the report of being able to actually talk about what we were observing in the space. And so the goals that we had set for the program were around creativity and self-expression and like making connections or social emotional work. And through the observation, we were able to see that the creativity and self-expression sort of component came to the foreground. And we were really happy and pleased with that. But we got a little bit of question from, I think, some of our stakeholders around more of an emphasis for school age things around problem solving, right? They wanted more opportunities for kids to like have agency and solve real world problems. And so by really honing in and looking at the programs that had done that successfully, we were able to have a team conversation about how were those programs set up differently versus the ones that supported more of our like creativity and open-ended response, like process-based learning, in order to think about redesigning some of our school age specific programs to fit more of those competencies.
Thank you. I see Kwang Guan has a question, has her hand up, so I'll turn it to her.
Hi, I'm very excited to see all the great tools and opportunities. I wondered, any of you, when you measure, what you measure in terms of your value is rather organizational or community levels. That was something to do with my keynote presentation, that like some of the needs to assess like our values to a broader level. So I'm actually really excited about the possibility of doing it with one of your tools like ODAX, but any of you have tried to assess, like, for example, community building or public good, third spaces, something like that?
I can speak a little bit. So our frameworks, both for the learning spaces and the programs, have connections back to our strategic plan and our core values of community, collaboration, compassion, and curiosity. 4Cs. And then we also have focus areas right now of cultivating connectedness and belonging, and then providing services that resonate. So within the programming report, we're looking at 3 like big buckets of learning and exploration, making connections, and engagement. I would say all 3 of those connect back to our strategic plan and focus areas. we get a little bit more granular with the learning spaces. Um, I I can't say that we're like putting this all in and putting a number on it of like 75% of interactions connect back to this, but we're starting to look at general trends to help influence how we're reporting and then how it's connecting back to the broader scope of things.
So I was just going to add a thought related to both of the questions. The first question about how these have been used in order to improve or hone in on, I can give both a sort of an example of how continued use helped streamline a lesson plan in the work. Katie's folks in the Fab Lab did a lot of work with, it was actually an engineering course that the focus of it was project management. And a key component of that was the collaborative work and the teamwork piece of things. And it started off where the approach to doing that was that students randomly created their own teams, and the learning that happened related to teamwork from just a random selection of who you were going to work with wasn't reaching sort of the level of outcome or the level of success that the instructor and the makerspace and the staff member and librarian were hoping for. And so that assignment was later revised in order to use like inventories and assessment tools, looking at the strengths of different folks enrolled in the class. And then that was used as a framework in order to determine who you would choose to be in on your team and the role they might play. So that's an example of a class that had very many iterations. Here at my new institution, this was not part of the culture that I came into, was the librarians really thinking about things in experiential education, sort of pedagogical framework. And in this case, it was an example of a newer faculty member. It was maybe their first year teaching, and they were very. The conversation hadn't happened about what he had really hoped his students would get out of the class that was transferable. And after the first iteration of that, we were able to sit down with the competencies and talk through what it is that he wished his students would have taken away from it that maybe they didn't. And we were able to use the competencies as a way to do that. As far as the community assessment piece, that is not something that it was intended with these tools, but that question actually sort of has inspired me. There's work that we're doing at my institution currently around a curricular approach to like student affairs and student development work, and the libraries is part of that, specifically looking at our student employment and library as third space. And so it has inspired me a little bit to think about how we might adopt some of the competencies, but have it framed more in the work that we're doing that is related to community engagement and sense of belonging. And so I can't say we've done it, but it's an inspiring thought.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're out of time. These sessions are flying by, but I love all these connections people are making. I'm making them in my brain too, even from listening to all of these talks. So I'm so thankful to have this day with all of you. So we are going to move on now to another break. And then in about, I guess, 17 minutes, the next breakout sessions will start. So enjoy your break and we'll see you all back soon.